wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends, and Dom was my soulmate.
This was not reckless driving. This was murder. Those were the words of Judge Nancy Russo, who would gain mainstream attention after sending a 19-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla to jail for 15 years to life. Her crime? Murdering her 20-year-old boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his 19-year-old friend, Davion Flanagan.
By Mackenzie will ripple forever in time. It's literally changed history because it's ended two lives.
Mackenzie was only 17 years old when she rammed her car into a warehouse, effectively leading everyone in the car to their end except for herself. Was it a murder, an accident, or a suicide murder plot? Join us as we see her shocking reaction to the sentence of murdering her boyfriend. Who is Mackenzie Shirilla? Watch this teenager's entire life falling apart as Judge Nancy delivers her verdict on a case that had haunted the victims' families for 2 years. Mackenzie Shirilla, who feigns innocence and remorse on her face, is about to receive news that'll leave her shocked and devastated. After all, Mackenzie is about to pay for the heinous crime that she had committed 2 years ago. After a long-drawn battle in the court and a bunch of emotional statements from the victims' families, it was decided that Mackenzie had unalived her boyfriend and his friend after rage speeding. Judge Nancy sentenced her to 15 years to life in prison. If you take one single glance at the crying image of Mackenzie, it is perhaps hard to imagine that this petite young girl would take 2 lives. However, the night when the then 17-year-old girl was found unconscious in her Toyota alongside her boyfriend and his friend, who were no longer breathing, the police immediately knew that the incident was hardly an accident. And while to everyone's surprise, none of Mackenzie's peers were surprised that the high school wannabe sweetheart was a murderer. Not much is known about Mackenzie Shirilla, a resident of Cleveland, Ohio. The day she was arrested for murder and reckless driving, all of her social media went private. Before that, the teenager was known for flaunting her rich life on TikTok and was often seen alongside her long-term boyfriend, Dominic Russo. After the accident, Mackenzie's parents kept a low profile too, but never left their daughter's side. In every court hearing, Natalie and John Shirilla sat right behind their daughter. And when her fate was ultimately decided, both the parents kept shouting for their daughter's life, citing her innocence. By the looks of it, before Shirilla drove Dominic and Davion to their end, her life seemed pretty normal. She would go out with friends and would do typical teenage stuff. But of course, Mackenzie didn't draw the line between having fun and actively putting herself in danger. Despite being only 17, the reckless teenager was known to drive, drink around at parties, and do recreational drugs like marijuana and mushrooms. It seemed like there was no stopping her. Most of the time, she was accompanied by her older boyfriend, Dominic. It seemed like the couple's life just revolved around each other. Before her socials went private, Mackenzie's Instagram was full of her pictures with Dominic, where the couple seemed to do fun things together and even posed for a prom picture. Shockingly, Mackenzie used the same photos to flood Dominic's obituary, leaving him messages like, "I love you and miss you." For anyone unaware of the story, that would seem like perfectly normal behavior. But once you realize that Mackenzie was successfully able to do away with her boyfriend's life, everything just goes down the hill. The court proceedings also revealed that Shirilla was a known bully in school. In multiple instances, she had demeaned people suffering from mental health issues, prompting them to unalive themselves if they were feeling depressed. She was known to demean and humiliate less popular kids too. By the time of the accident, Davion Flanagan's sister had gone to school with Mackenzie, who told her parents about the popular girl's bullying nature. But who knew that a typical playground bully would turn into a murderer too? Before Mackenzie was a vicious taker of lives, it seemed like Dominic and she lived in a world of their own. They had known each other their entire life, and it might be a fair thing to say that Russo seemed obsessed with his girlfriend. For Dominic's friends, Mackenzie was a problem who was holding him down. And while it is not shocking how there's a stark contrast between how Dominic and his friends view Shirilla. Mackenzie, an alleged psychopath. There's no doubt that in all court photos and videos, Mackenzie seems to look grief-stricken and devastated. In many instances, she's seen crying, pleading her innocence, and flinching whenever her former boyfriend and his friend are brought up. However, for Dominic's close friends and his parents, Mackenzie was nothing but a facade. While she looked charismatic and charming on her social media, in reality, she was alleged to be highly manipulative and toxic. Many key testimonies and data collected from the police investigation described her as a brat who always got what she wanted. Even the police noted that Sherilla had a violent streak in her that switched her from a responsible driver to a life snatcher on wheels, simply because she had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend. The video of the accident also shows us the same. So how come a 17-year-old goes from showering her boyfriend with "I love yous" to driving him to death? Police suspected that a lot of pent-up anger and the sheer urge to take revenge on her boyfriend had caused Mackenzie to accelerate to 100 miles per hour in the first place. For Dominic's parents and friends, Mackenzie losing control behind the wheels wasn't her first rodeo. You see, Sherilla was known to road rage whenever things didn't go her way, and often she had put others in active harm's way. Most of the time, the victim of Mackenzie's angry outbursts was her boyfriend, Dominic, so it is safe to say that the couple's relationship wasn't as stable as Instagram made it to be. Mackenzie's relationship with Dominic. Picture perfect. That's how most people would describe the relationship between Sherilla and Russo. The couple had been dating for 3 to 4 years before the fatal incident, which means both of them were mere kids when they fell in love. It's true that Mackenzie and Dominic were high school sweethearts by all measures, but their love was only perfect on social media during the extensive trial. Russo's family told the judge that Mackenzie would spend most of her time at Dominic's house, where they had witnessed several fights between the couple. Turns out, every other day, the couple would fight but make up with each other pretty soon. According to Dominic's mother's testimony in court, Mackenzie would fight with Dominic many times and would threaten to kill him too. Angelo, who is Dominic's brother, testified the very same. In fact, the court proceedings revealed that the entire Russo family had found Mackenzie toxic and problematic, and had hoped that Dominic would break up with her. A court document reveals that Angelo Russo had said the following in his testimony: "I witnessed a lot of negative behavior from her to my brother, and that just kind of pushed away as a big brother figure because she just wasn't fair to him." However, the most insightful testimony came from Christine Russo, Dominic's older sister, who had described her brother as a victim of domestic abuse that happened behind closed doors. There was no denying that Mackenzie was only 17 when she slayed her boyfriend and his friend. But even so, she had manipulated a 19-year-old Dominic to stay with her when he didn't want to. This is why Christine told the court that Dominic's close friends weren't exactly shocked that Mackenzie had driven her boyfriend to death. Everyone had monitored her behavior, and they knew that she was capable of harming Dominic physically. After all, the couple was used to fights that turned into screaming contests, and on more than one occasion, Mackenzie had thrown things at Dominic. No wonder why the Russo family had continuously testified how horrible the teenager was to her boyfriend. Even in his home, he didn't feel safe because Mackenzie would have violent outbursts, which Dominic had to control. In her testimony, Christine Russo said, "You would never think in a million years, nobody ever would have thought that this would happen. I think everybody says that when somebody's in a domestic violence situation, or if they have an abusive partner, you just don't see that from the outside. It happens behind closed doors." The testimonies of the Russo family were impactful and played a pivotal role in sending Mackenzie behind bars. However, at the trial, prosecutors also highlighted 2 key incidents that showcased Mackenzie's threatening and violent behavior. The first important incident occurred on July 17, 2022, just 2 weeks before the day when Sherilla took her boyfriend and his friend's life. What happened was that Mackenzie was driving with Dominic on Interstate 71 when the couple began to fight. The prosecutors reported that Sherilla was so upset over their disagreement that she had threatened to crash the car. Yep, she kept telling Dominic that if he didn't listen to what she had to say, she'd crash the car in any nearby vehicle to make sure that both of them departed this world. Russo was distressed that he had to call his mother to pick him up. When his mom wasn't available, he ended up calling his friend, who had heard Mackenzie saying that she was going to crash the car. By the time Dominic's friend got there to pick him up, Russo had made Mackenzie pull over on the side of the road. When the friend pulled over, Dominic's passenger's side door was open, and Mackenzie was hitting him with both of her hands. Upon seeing his friend, Russo left the car immediately and went home. This incident should have been enough to gauge how toxic and violent Mackenzie was. But the prosecution had another case up their sleeve that acted like a final nail in the coffin of the teenager's freedom. In another incident, in July 2022, Russo had recorded Mackenzie getting verbally and physically abusive towards him. The prosecution was able to obtain data from Dominic's phone, which had a video of Sharilla repeatedly degrading Dominic, threatening him, and damaging his property, as per the court filing. The altercation occurred when Dominic had banned Mackenzie from entering his home because of her disruptive and violent behavior. The court documents also said that the couple had been fighting, and Dominic just wanted some physical space. So he wasn't comfortable with letting her inside and even tried to calm her down so she could go home. But Mackenzie was relentless. She kept banging the door, demanding Russo to let her in. When he refused again, she began to call him degrading and highly inappropriate names. The video also revealed that Mackenzie had threatened to damage his car and property if he didn't open the door. She also counted down multiple times to compel him to open the door. When Mackenzie didn't listen, Russo stopped recording and called her mom for help. Seeing such evidence in court, Mackenzie's defense argued that the couple's fights were hardly ever one-sided. Dominic would get into physical and verbal altercations with his girlfriend too, but Sharilla didn't have the habit of recording. Mackenzie's lawyers also argued that both of them were used to the toxicity of their relationship. This is why Dominic didn't break up with Mackenzie. However, Dominic's friends repeatedly talked about how it was next to impossible to break up with Mackenzie, as she would get extremely violent and toxic. So for her, the only recourse for their toxic breakup was to unalive Dominic, a plan that she executed perfectly. The fatal incident. In July 2022, Mackenzie, Dominic, and Davian were smoking pot at a friend's house. The night seemed typical. The group of friends had gathered around their usual spot to smoke up, and they generally had a good time. Towards the end of the hangout, Dominic and Mackenzie began to argue about an unknown issue. Since their friends were habitual of seeing them fight, they didn't pay any heed. Mackenzie and Dominic decided to head out when Davian asked the designated driver if she would drop him home. Since Mackenzie was already driving, she said yes, and the trio headed out. As per the police records, it is likely that the trio was smoking up in the car too. The police had found hallucinogenic mushrooms at the crime scene after all. There's little information about what went down in the car, but CCTV footage showed Mackenzie driving responsibly towards Strongsville before she missed the cut. Then suddenly, Mackenzie pressed the accelerator as the car hit 100 miles per hour. The teenager didn't attempt to push the brakes and crashed into a brick wall. Dominic and Davian, who weren't wearing seatbelts, succumbed to their injuries right on the scene. Mackenzie, whose Prada slippers were still on the accelerator, was wearing a seatbelt and had only lost consciousness. There was no way for the police to determine what had gone down in the car before Mackenzie pushed the accelerator and drove them to their end. The most calculated guess is that the couple had gotten into a fight once again. Davian was just an innocent bystander. What happens next is an unraveling of events that no one was prepared for. Police investigation and the trial. The medical staff that treated Mackenzie after the fatal crash noticed that she was displaying grief, guilt, and shame whenever they questioned her about the incident. While that sounds perfectly normal, Mackenzie didn't express any shock or confusion at what had happened. In a few of her earlier statements, she did call the incident an accident, but didn't seem too surprised about it. It was almost like she knew exactly what she was doing when she decided to speed up on the road that had very low visibility at 5:30 a.m. The second issue was that Mackenzie was extremely high while driving. Her THC levels were above the legal limit in Ohio. As per her arrangement, Dominic, it seemed like Mackenzie was used to driving while being high, but nothing about that day was ordinary. The first person who took the stand was Dr. Esther Seng, a Metro Health System trauma surgeon who had worked on Mackenzie's first medical report. According to Dr. Esther's testimony, Sharilla didn't remember what had led to the crash. Her medical report indicated that Mackenzie kept crying and had trouble processing her heavy loss and grief. Right after the accident, the teenager had fallen into depression and kept stating that she wanted to unalive herself and it was her fault that Dominic was gone. A part of the medical report also cited that Mackenzie had taken the responsibility for slaying her boyfriend, but her condition was emotionally unstable. For Sharilla's defense attorney, James McDonald, the medical report was irrelevant as it didn't say that his client had purposefully taken Dominic's life. McDonald kept pressing Esther for any confession she heard from Mackenzie. However, the doctor only stuck to what she had written in her medical record and didn't provide any additional details. The police were skeptical of Mackenzie's statements from the get-go. The CCTV footage was clear in showing that Sharilla hadn't tried to hit the brakes at all. Not to mention, a certified forensic mechanic, Mark Sargent, also testified in the court that her car's event data recorded showed that before ramming into the brick wall, the accelerator pedal was being pushed down with full force while the brakes were untouched. James McDonald was having none of it, though. He kept insisting that the car's black box, or the event recorder, couldn't give us an exact insight into what was going on in the car or the driver's head. So the data from the event recorder shouldn't be seen as conclusive proof of Mackenzie intentionally trying to kill Dominic without paying any heed to Davian's car. McDonald did agree that there's a huge possibility that his client was driving recklessly. But in the moment leading to the accident, it was possible that Sharilla was trying to avoid something on the road, or perhaps it was a passenger in the car who would have pulled her steering wheel, causing her to lose control of the car altogether. The court never heard from Mackenzie if it was either Dominic or Davian who had tried to push her away from the steering wheel, or if it was her boyfriend who ultimately drove them into the brick wall. For the most important details of the car, Mackenzie's memory came blank, an issue that the prosecution highlighted multiple times. The defense also kept bringing up the fact that Mackenzie was driving the car at 5:30 a.m. when it was really dark outside. So it was probable that the darkness had an effect on Sharilla's perception reaction time. But of course, nothing really stood against the case that the prosecution had brought up. One of the most monumental instances in the court was the testimony of Cuyahoga County Deputy Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Joseph Falo. Dr. Joseph had testified that his team had changed their determination of the deaths of Dominic and Davian from accidents to homicides after reading the police's report on the incident. He told the court that nothing about Mackenzie's driving had suggested that the two instances of unaliving in the car weren't intentional. The wounds that Dominic and Davian couldn't endure were pretty fatal. While the car's airbags shot up, the speed of Mackenzie's driving had left no survival room for the friends. By the third day of the trial, significant evidence was racked against Mackenzie, who looked remorseful while sitting in her chair. She was only 17 when the crime had occurred, but the court was trying her as an adult. Since she had waived her right to be trialed by a jury, her fate rested in the hands of Judge Russo. Perhaps the only tipping point that could have worked in Mackenzie's favor was the testimony that had come from her own mother. Natalie had testified that her daughter was diagnosed with a disorder that causes her to pass out from her sodium and hydration levels. The mother urged the judge to consider that her condition, which is referred to as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, was the more likely reason why her daughter had driven into a brick wall. Since the primary symptoms of the disorder are lightheadedness or short spells of fainting, it was possible that Mackenzie had passed out behind the wheel. However, the prosecution was able to contest those claims fairly well. Russo's lawyer had cited that if Mackenzie had really passed out, Dominic, who was sitting on the front seat, might have tried to take control of the wheel. However, no such evidence was found. It's true that the prosecution had heaps and heaps of evidence against Mackenzie, but perhaps it was her character testimonies that stood out in the court. Judge Nancy had considered a lot of technical evidence against the teenager before moving on to emotionally driven character testimonies against Mackenzie. Every witness under prosecution had told the judge that Mackenzie was as reckless as it gets. In a highly popular resurfaced TikTok, we can see her flaunting her endurance with drugs. It's unclear if Mackenzie made the TikTok after or before the crash, but the audio says, "I'm not even cool. I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die." While TikTok wasn't brought forward as evidence, it did give us some insight into how irresponsible the teenager was with her drug consumption. The fact that she seemed overly active on social media after unaliving Dominic and Davian was also unsettling. In particular, Davian's dad took to social media to reveal that it was Sharilla's lack of remorse that had left them shocked and confused. The fathers of Dominic and Davian had made respective statements about forgiving Mackenzie, who had done an extremely stupid thing. Both families expressed that they didn't want to see her behind bars forever. However, she had made no attempt to apologize to Davian's family, even though he was a mere pawn in her game. While talking to the media, Davian's parents, Scott and Jamie, said that it is very hard for them to forgive someone who refuses to take accountability. They had asked Mackenzie several times what had happened to their son, but she only responded that she didn't remember. To make matters worse, Mackenzie's parents kept creating havoc in the court to allege that her daughter was innocent. The families of the victims hardly got any closure from Mackenzie's sentencing. Even after receiving the verdict from Judge Nancy, Mackenzie made no attempt to seek forgiveness from the parents of Dominic and Davian, leaving the parents no choice but to see her as a remorseless bully who could do away with anyone because she wanted to. Perhaps this is why they couldn't help but protest the punishment that was given to Mackenzie. The verdict. It wasn't shocking that Judge Nancy had found Sharilla guilty of 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 of drug possession, and 1 of possessing criminal tools, in addition to 4 counts of murder. In a blistering verdict, the judge had called Mackenzie a literal hell on wheels, who very calculatedly attempted to end her relationship by ending Dominic's life once and for all. To quote the judge, her actions were controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. This was not reckless driving. This was murder. The judge also emphasized that Mackenzie's crime was immaculate and planned to precision. She had purposefully chosen a time to cause the accident when she knew that there would be no witnesses and no one would come for their help at 5:30 a.m. Nothing about the incident had indicated that Mackenzie was unintentionally at the forefront of an unfortunate day. Her purpose was to unalive her boyfriend to get out of a toxic relationship, and that's exactly what she did. Judge Nancy had called the crash methodical, deliberate, and intentional. The judge sentenced Mackenzie to 15 years to life in prison, and her sentence was also concurrent. Instead of serving 2 sentences for taking 2 lives, Mackenzie is serving 1. She would be eligible for parole when she reaches her mid-30s. It isn't surprising that Mackenzie's parents are already in the process of appealing the verdict. Natalie Sharilla had taken an extreme offense to Judge Nancy, calling her daughter a literal hell on wheels. As the policeman took Mackenzie to jail, her parents kept appealing to the court that their daughter was innocent. Even outside the court, the Sharilla family had insisted that their daughter had no motive to slay Dominic and Davian. Whatever their issues were, they were extremely two-sided. Not to mention, Mackenzie's mother also insisted that Judge Nancy was quick to dismiss her daughter's medical issues that might have caused the crash in the first place. On the other hand, Davian's family felt unsatisfied by the punishment as Mackenzie's sentence is concurrent. According to Scott and Jamie, the sentencing is unfair as the teenager had taken not 1 but 2 equally valuable lives. And when Mackenzie is done serving her 15 years in jail, they'll be too old to appeal her parole. But it would be Davian's sisters who would fight to keep Mackenzie in for another 15 years, so justice is served to their brother as well. The Mackenzie Sharilla case is far from over. If her family goes with the appeal process, we might get to hear more about the court proceedings. Till then, Mackenzie is bound in her 4-walled cell, and there's no going out. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.